Welcome to the Storypowers Podcast, the show about the power of stories, the people who tell them, and why you should be doing it too. I'm your host, keynote speaker and storytelling coach, Francisco Mahfuz. My guest today is Michael Kirsten. After a long career as a marketing executive who led international teams, executed multinational research projects, and implemented a global content strategy across 3 continents, he is now the founder of Human Marketing, a company helping businesses create content and tell stories that resonate with other humans. Before I met Michael, I used to think I was unlucky in business for launching my keynote speaking career early last year. But I think he had it worse because after 20 years in the corporate world, Michael was all set to finally take a sabbatical year and travel around the world, and then COVID hit. And if that wasn't enough, he's a football fan and has just watched Germany get beaten in the Euros by England, of all teams. The poor man can't catch a break. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Kirsten.
That,
Michael, welcome to the show.
this was a brutal reminder, my friend. I don't even know what to say. But thanks for refreshing memories that were already gone. Good on me. Thank
Well,
you.
listen,
Hey.
I'm a football fan too, and I am Brazilian, and I have just watched Brazil lose the Copa America final to Argentina. Argentina hadn't won anything in 28 years,
Good on Messi.
so yes, I'm happy for him. But I think at least on Germany's from Germany's point of view, England is not your sworn enemy, and they didn't even win at the end of the day.
You
So
wouldn't
I
believe.
think it's last bad.
You wouldn't believe. I watched the final together with a couple of English friends in an Irish pub. So you can imagine how that turned out. So
Yeah, I I was taking part of a football fantasy thing with a whole bunch of English people, and I really wanted to watch the final live, but I knew they were going to lose, and I just couldn't be the guy being really happy in a place full of
yeah,
English people
yeah, yeah.
when
I,
when they lost.
I tried all my empathy on that night. All my empathy.
Yes, and I think to perhaps not so smoothly lead us into stories, though I find it fascinating how sometimes the whole narrative of something like football can change the way we see it, because England started the game very well. They scored a goal in 2 minutes, and for the first 20 or 30 minutes they were clearly superior to Germany. So at that point, most of the people that I knew were saying, okay, well, they're clearly the better team, they're going to win this, there's no question here. And they ended up not doing anything else for the rest of the game, and then they went to extra time and they went to penalties and they lost. But because the narrative started with them being so much better, I think the way most English people see that game now is that one of missed opportunity. Whereas if they had just been poor and lost, 2-0 or 3-0 or whatever, then they wouldn't feel that way. They'll think, wow, we came up against a better team. But a lot of the ones that I'm speaking to, because of how it was framed to begin with, to them feels like a much worse loss than it was.
I mean, it's all when we talk about storytelling, right? Everything was designed for the perfect hero story, right? 55 years of suffering, of waiting for this one big moment. And if that not would be alone, you also play in front of your own home crowd in Wembley after 1 year of suffering for the whole entire world. So the frame for this whole thing, the story frame was this big fairy tale after a lot of suffering, and after every time standing up again and trying to fight, and finally you make it, and then you rise from the ashes like Phoenix, right? And then they still can't do penalties. So
Yeah, and the plot got significantly more complicated, and this is mostly what people have talked about since the end of the game, which was that, for anyone who hasn't watched it, so England went to penalties. England has a history of never winning penalty shootouts, and then I think they were ahead when one of the first people, a kid really, who's 19 years old, that came up to, or 21 years old, Rashford, came up to take a penalty. He had just gone into the game to take a penalty because he's a very good penalty taker, and he missed. And the second guy who was brought on to take a penalty missed, and the last one that had to score was a 19-year-old kid who also missed. And the three of them, other than very young, are also black. So I said to a friend of mine, as soon as that happened, well, first when the last one was chosen, I was like, why is a 19-year-old kid taking a decisive penalty? That just doesn't, psychologically, that just didn't make sense to me. But as soon as he missed, I said, I can guarantee there'll be headlines about the racist abuse of these players tomorrow, because I mean, the fact that three of them missed and the three of them were black, I mean, how idiots people can be, particularly in this subject. But then there was no question about it. Unfortunately, immediately happened the next few days that the headlines were all about that.
It's I had a similar feeling when it was over, right? It shows us the good and the bad about the societies we live in, right? I mean, on the one hand, you have really these racial abuse that you see all over the place, especially over the last couple of years rising, and but you also had all these support the players got after, not only from their squad but from the society, from many people. But it tells us again that the societies we live in, they are very fragile. And there is a lot of work to do still. I feel sorry for the three young players, but on the other hand, you also have to admire their guts. You have to admire their courage in that young age, knowing what would happen. I think they knew very, very clearly what would happen if they're going to miss the penalty, and they still had the courage to go there. So
Yeah. No, I completely agree, and I think one. I mean, this is not a solution in general. This is not a solution for society, and I don't think this is the podcast to discuss societal solutions necessarily. But one thing that those young players should do, which is the opposite of what you have done in the last few months, is they should probably try to stay as clear as they possibly can from social media. Because I don't think these are people that are coming across this type of treatment and behavior in the real world. It's the social media world where this horrible people come out and make their lives miserable.
It's very fascinating. I just saw a clip yesterday from Stephen Bartlett about the topic where he spoke 6 months ago, even before the incident, about it, and he said it's about these whole social media phenomena because it's not real, right? It hasn't. You can type something on a platform, press send, and just leave, and there are no real life consequences, right? You wouldn't walk up to a person on the street and abuse them because there would be real world consequences coming with it. So independently from this incident or this topic in society, I think there is something about the use of social media and how it's going to be used by some people. And I mean, there are discussions about how platforms are right now developing. I mean, you look at the whole Facebook thing and you ask yourself, is that really the core sense of a platform like this? But yes, there's no real world consequence. And as long as these people are not being called out who do that and face real world consequences, and not only being banned from the platform, but maybe also enlisted to their employers, I think until we can't come up with a solution of this problem, we have to endure it.
Yes, and when you talk about no real life or new world consequences, one thing that is interesting, I mean, that topic is interesting based on you and I talking about it, because we are two people who have clearly seen real life consequences, and very positive ones, from using social media a lot.
Yep.
So if, for anyone who doesn't follow you on LinkedIn, you are someone who, how long is it now? Has it been a year that you've been? It's not as long,
I mean,
right?
I'm on the platform since 2007 because
Sure.
I worked in corporate, right, and we used the platform by that time. I worked for a recruitment company, so we used the platform either to recruit candidates or to get our word out. But from my personal point of view, from my personal account and my personal brand, I started to use it in February. So I played around a little bit in January, but with a systematic strategy and with a plan, and use it as As the platform where I build my business, it's from February.
Okay, so for anyone who doesn't follow you, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because you are one of the few people that I seem to come across on LinkedIn, which doesn't mean that that's everyone, because there's, I don't know how many, 720 million people on
240
LinkedIn
million
or
people,
something.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but you're one of the few people on LinkedIn who genuinely tell stories on a regular basis, because there's a lot of people that love talking about hashtag storytelling. The vast majority of them don't tell stories. They wouldn't know what a story was if it bit them in the face. But one thing that caught my attention was almost every post for a while seemed to be a story.
Yeah,
And most of them are, most if not all of them, are personal. And
yeah,
I don't mean just personal. They're things you've lived through. Some of them are about work, but the vast majority of them don't seem to be about work. Um, so, well, the first thing I wanted to understand a bit better is how deliberate is that part? The fact that most of the things you're talking about are not only personal, but they're not immediately work related. A lot of
yeah,
them are life lessons, but not necessarily something you'd go and say, "Oh, okay, I can see how that applies to my business." They are stories, but they're not necessarily business stories as most people would define them.
yeah. It's correct. Um, Look, when I said I played around in January a little bit on LinkedIn, one of the things that I was very clear about it was, I mean, I founded my business in I thought about the business in January, and I started to build the foundations for it in February, and then started in March. And I'm sitting here in my living room in Germany, in Hamburg, and I was aware that based on my experience and what I have to offer, my potential audience is everywhere. And it was very clear that from Hamburg in the current state, I will not reach them when I sit on my balcony and scream at them stories. It's not going to work. So I had to find a platform where my audience is, and I decided that's going to be LinkedIn. And I made a very deliberate decision only to use LinkedIn for that. And that's how it started. And then what happened is my company is called Human Marketing, right? I mean, if you think your brand is human marketing, and you're not a human, bit of false advertising, I guess. And then it's also, that's my personality, right? I have been through some things in life, and I figured out that telling my stories is helping people. That I realized quite quickly when I started to tell some of those stories, and that they don't, as you said, they are not mostly related to business, for sure not to mine. They are mostly related to me, but I am the business. I'm a solopreneur. Of course, I offer service. I offer marketing services, especially content marketing and personal branding. But I'm the company, no one else. So that's who I am, and that's the person you would work with. So I think you better know whom you're talking to, and that's why I started to tell those stories.
The reason I ask that is because what I can't figure out, and I'm not sure if there's a way to figure out before, if you had not experimented with that for a while, is okay. So this is what I'm thinking. When I started on LinkedIn,
Mm-hmm.
most of my businesses was focused on speaking and corporate training. And
Mm-hmm.
although I knew that this is not necessarily the platform for that, it's not as if a lot of speakers are hired because of the work because of the things they put out on LinkedIn. I was mostly brand building. So I wasn't necessarily trying to get business out of LinkedIn. So I tended to talk about storytelling more in the why of storytelling in the corporate world, or in the world. So not necessarily applying it to entrepreneurs or to small business owners, to anything like that. And what I found was that I created a brand, and people recognize me as a story guy, but that didn't necessarily lead to any business, because what people weren't doing is they weren't seeing themselves in the stories. They weren't seeing their own problems in my stories. So once I switched around and I thought, okay, well, I'm spending all this time here, I might as well get clients through here. I switched the focus of the stories to be more about entrepreneurs and startups and people who could generally tell the stories and not hire me to speak at a company. And immediately, not immediately, but within maybe a month or so, I started getting inquiries as, can you help me tell my story? That's essentially what inquiry I get. So my the mystery to me is your approach where you're not doing that at all just a different approach that can work as well when your stories are being as successful as they have been? Or if you did that, it would be 5 times more effective. So that's what I don't know.
Well, no one knows. The thing for me is it's let's start from a different point of view. It's just because it's a social media platform doesn't mean the rules from real life don't apply here, right? So it's all about human connection. It's all about helping other people. So, and you wouldn't go to a stranger on the street who's waiting at a traffic light and yelling at them like, look, I have these services to offering. Do you want to buy? I mean, this guy would look at you like, who are you? So you have to build a human connection first before you can even go to later on to a conversation maybe about how you can help people in their business. And how you build a human connection, you build it again in a human way. You build it by starting a conversation, and the conversation is not immediately about your business.
Right. Let me get a definition here from you, because you clearly love the word human. It appears very prominently in your company name and everything.
Wonder why?
You do. So we are fortunately, I think, not yet surrounded by robots who are posting. I mean, there's plenty of bots, but this is a slightly different conversation. So what makes a conversation or marketing or the way you show up on a social platform like LinkedIn human to you?
I mean, it's all start with the intent, right? Do you understand who you are, how authentic you are, even on the platform, right? For example, are you writing the way you talk? It starts with those foundations. But then it's how you connect with other people. Of course, you can connect with them in a certain business way, or you just be the authentic you are. In my case, as you say, I'm a guy who's telling his stories very openly. I'm not shy about who I am. I'm okay in my own skin. And that's how I reach out to other people. And I don't have, and of course I am a business owner. And of course I want to increase my revenue and I want to get more clients on board. But that's not my first intention being on LinkedIn. My first intention is really to be there to connect with other people and to have conversations with them. Because to explain it to your audience, I lost my job in the end of 2019, and as you said, my plan was to go on a trip. Thanks for the reminder, by the way. And then the whole COVID thing hit, and I tried to find a job for over a year, and I was alone, and I was just the pandemic. I was also isolating myself a little bit from the world, and for me, this is my new life, is to connect with as many people as possible, to learn what they are doing, to have a chat with them. And then sometimes you're going to find common ground for working together. Sometimes they know someone who would like to talk to me. Sometimes I know someone who likes to talk to them. And that's how I approach it at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting because your approach seems to be more of a networking approach than ironically, content marketing approach. So it seems to me, from at least from the outside and from the way I tend to understand these things, that it's less, let me talk about problems that you might be going through. Let me talk about how I got over these problems or how I get my clients over these problems. It's more about, this is who I am. If you like who I am and you need help with your content, then you're going to think of me. But you're not necessarily, it doesn't seem to me that you're necessarily talking about how you use your content for business necessarily in most of the posts you put out.
No, but I use my content. My posts are my content, and that's the case study, right? And obviously, some of the posts, most of the posts are personal, but there are a thought process when I write a post. And based on the experience I had over the last 4 months, I also figured out that some of the problems that I described that are maybe, or situations of my personal, they are also the situations of many other people's lives, or they have been through, and that's how they connect to the stories. They are not connecting to the story because they're reading a story about my personal life. They are connecting to the story because I describe something they have experienced as well. That's how it works.
Yes, this is the paradox that a lot of people, I think, misunderstand. This whole idea that no, the story shouldn't be about you, should be about your audience. Yes, of course, but the vehicle of the story is always you.
Yeah.
So the audience relates to something you've lived through because it resonates with them. It's something they're going through, they have gone through. So yeah, I think what I'm trying to understand is also that when someone thinks, okay, I know this guy Michael seems to be doing really well. He gets tons of engagement. I would love to have some of that. But when they talk to you, isn't there an expectation from a lot of them, or a fear from a lot of them, that they're gonna have to be as personal as you are
Yeah.
when they are putting content out?
Yeah. That's one of the first things. I mean, I have done a couple of workshops over the last few weeks. For example, also with some IT salespeople, and they all said to me like, "I don't want to write in such a personal way." And I said to them, "You don't have to. I mean, this is the whole thing. Just because I do it and it works for me doesn't mean it works for you. First of all, I don't even know if you're going to speak to the same audience as I do. If you're working in IT, you likely don't. But the framework is the same. And the framework is figure out who you are, figure out what problems you want to solve with the things you produce or you sell or you offer as a service. Find your audience for it and find a way how to connect with this audience in the most effective way through your content. And of course, you don't have to be as personal. This is authentic me. That's who I am. But you don't have to follow that path if you are not comfortable with it. Makes no sense.
So if someone is not posting things that are that personal, what type of things are you more likely to suggest that they post?
It all starts with the audience. I'm still sometimes a bit struck when I talk to people and they are telling me about all these things they want to tell the world about themselves. And it's the same thing when you talk to companies about their websites or about their social media presence. And what I always remind those guys, you're having an audience, right? You want to speak to this audience. The audience doesn't care about you. They care about themselves. So the first step I always do with my clients or with people who want to work with me is try to remind them that in every part of their content or their marketing initiatives, the first thing they have to have in mind, how do they speak to their audience and what stories they're going to want to tell them. And if you don't want to tell personal stories, then tell stories about them and about their problems and how they are able to, or how they can overcome that, or how you might be able to help them with them. But always have in mind, it's about them. It's not about you.
In the type of content that you are putting out, and also that you're helping people put out, how do you see that distinction between the strategy of your marketing and the more tactical things? Because I think it's probably worth explaining this to people who have no idea what I'm talking about. How, in your experience, pre-LinkedIn, how would you separate those two things, the strategic to the tactical?
I think the strategic thing is it is important, right? You need to understand what you are doing, why you are doing it, and what should be the final outcome, right? And therefore, you need to have a strategy. And it starts, as I've said to you, with understanding who you are, what you want to sell, finding your audience, figure out where they are, how do you have to speak to them, and then how you build a connection with them that leads to long-term engagement. So that's the strategy. The tactic is to show up every day. And I think that's where most people, especially on LinkedIn, having trouble. So you start with these big hooray, right? And you're going to start, and the first 1 or 2 weeks can be quite exciting, maybe. But then when you have these expectation of short-term success, and the success is not coming, then most of the people are like, that's not working. That's not working. I'll try something else. I did that 2 weeks or 4 weeks, and I'm getting a bit bored. I don't want to spend 2 hours a day there connecting with people and thinking about what I write and liking other people's posts. It's just too much for me. I find something else. And then they go to another thing, and they do it again for 2, 3, 4 weeks, maybe 2 months. don't see immediate results, and they're like trying something else. So the tactic for me is really like, take your strategy and put it into action, but do it consistently every day. And also understand that you have to have patience, and you have to put into the daily work.
Yeah, you post not only every day, but you did it every day for a very long time before you missed a day, right?
Yeah, it's I also have to experiment. For me, it's fun. I love that, right? For me, I'm not struggling. I know many people struggle with coming up with stories and posting there every day. And I say to some people, it is not so much that you have to post every day. I mean, if you start with two days the week, fine. But what you have to have a strategy before you're going to start. So, for example, for me, it was very clear in January. I found a business. Known only to a few people over the last 20 years as the guy who works for Kelly. Outside of that, no one knew me. So I have to create awareness for myself and for my new business and for what I do first. And that's going to take a while to let the world know that I'm existing, right? That there is this guy in Hamburg who does that. So that's going to take time. So, and then I decided to, okay, how often do I want to post? For me, I decided daily. And then, but also there's little things like I post, for example, every day at the same time. I post 3 p.m. because I know my target audience is mostly in the US and in the UK. 3 p.m. is 2 p.m. in the UK. People are coming back from lunch breaks. 3 p.m. is 9 a.m. the morning in the east of the US. People go to work. So that's mostly where they're on LinkedIn, not during their cramped day. So that's what I decided very early, and then I stick to it. And then I also decided, okay, how do I want to approach it? For me, it was clear. I want to engage with the people who are commenting on my post. I want to connect with the people who engage with my content. So, but that takes daily work to do that. And I did it from February to May, nearly every day. I didn't do weekends for a long time. I do it now from time to time, but only short stuff that pops up in my head. But the real results, the real number shift came after 3 months, came in May.
How many hours would you say that you spend on a daily basis between, let's say writing the post, if you're not writing them beforehand, posting, engaging and all of that, how many hours would you say you spend per day?
Before I say that, I would like to tell everyone who's listening today they don't have to do that.
Sure.
Also
Some people running for the hills.
Because that's one of the things that I have in my workshop. Because also, again, if you are employed for a company, it's everything that matters is what you want to get out of it. As I say, I'm sitting in Hamburg. I'm a new business owner who just started. And for me, LinkedIn is my number one marketing and sales tool. So it would be a bit stupid if I say, this is my only marketing and sales tool, that I spend only 20 minutes a day on it, because that would mean I'd only do 20 minutes marketing and sales. So I spend, I would say, 3 to 4 hours a day, at least. And then when things explode, I mean, I had a few posts over the last 3 weeks who got, luckily, some good engagement. But they have follow-up consequences, right? So in terms of comments you're getting, profile visitors, your DMs are piling up. So I remember, for example, 2 weeks ago, I had a pretty good running post, and my weekend was wrecked because I spent nearly the whole weekend just engaging with people and trying to answer emails and comments and this kind of stuff. And that's the approach that works for me.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people don't quite get one, that they don't understand the time. Either they don't understand the time it takes, or they don't understand that the time someone who's getting any type of real engagement on LinkedIn spends is very different than the time they spend. So I don't think I ever spent 3 or 4 hours like fully engaged with it. If I post, if I take into account all the times I dip in and out, which is not even the most effective strategy, but it might be 2 to 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
But a lot of that time is very intentional, and I think people don't, like, I'm not on the feed. I'm not scrolling the feed.
That's the whole thing. So what you are doing is, and again, the purpose at the end of the day, and you have said that, right? Because I'm writing a more broader post about my personal life, but there is an intention behind it, right? Because as you know, as larger you're getting in terms of your followers, and as more of your posts are going to be seen, there's a likelihood that happened to me over the last 1.5 months that people also see my posts. They haven't even commented on it, or they haven't even made them, the good old lurkers, right? And all of a sudden you're getting a DM from them saying like, I've seen some of your posts and can we have a chat about work? And that happened to me a few times over the last 2 weeks. So there is an intention behind it. But as you say, most of my time on LinkedIn is not on the feed scrolling down or up. And if I do that, then it's mostly to engage with other people on their posts that I want to speak to. But it's mostly engaging with my audience and also connecting and networking with people on the platform.
I find that very fascinating how, I don't know if it's a question of, I don't know what it is, but how I wouldn't say the lurkers, but the people who might like your content but don't comment on it seem to be more likely to approach you for work than the
Absolutely.
ones who appear all the time. The ones who appear all the time, I don't know if it, to me, it's like the moment I connect with someone, sometimes like, okay, I seen you like my stuff. Send connect request, and they immediately start talking to me about business.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those where I think the moment they feel, I don't know, they got the courage to actually talk to you. They
Yeah.
say that they're interested. Whereas the people that show up all the time, they're nice. It's a nice audience to have, and you can count on them. But they are not ones that 6 months down the line will go, "Oh, I've been commenting your posts every day for 6 months. Now I want to work together." That doesn't seem to be the case.
They are still your tribe, they're still your
Mm.
audience, right? But as you said, they might not do business with you, right? But they just do it because they like your content and they want to engage with you. But I mean, don't forget, we're talking about 740 million members on LinkedIn. Only 3% are actively posting. So that means even though that of the 740 million members, I'm sure a couple of million, they have already forgotten their password and their account information, right? But there are the large number of members, they are on the platform, but they are not active on it, all right? They scroll through things. They may even like sometimes something, but they go through, they read some, and if they go through and they read some of your stuff for a couple of months, and that's also part of marketing, right? Be in the head of the people you may want to work with by the time they have to make a decision whom they reach out, who they want to talk to when they want to solve their problem. And that takes prep work because you have to be in their mind. So therefore they have to know you, they have to see you, they have to understand that you're around. That's how it works.
Right. So let me take us back to more the storytelling side of things. And this I find very, very interesting that if I'm not crazy, I read in one of your posts that when you were still looking for a job, and this would have been, I think, 2020, at some point in 2020, a headhunter told you that you needed to work on your storytelling. Um, so were you just not telling the right stories at the time? Were you just did not have a clue what you were doing? I mean, you're
I,
German, so I would understand if
It's a
that.
mixture. It's a mixture. Mate, I lived 2 years in Australia. Maybe I blame them for that, for my
Right.
non-German approach and something. Look,
Right.
I was not like. I mean, I read your story, right? You were a storyteller from a very young age, right? You like to tell stories. I read your story about you standing in front of a classroom. We have a similar kind of experience from childhood. We were not the most coolest kids in the room. So I grew up in East Germany, a communist country, and came here before the wall came down at the age of 13 in a totally new society. And I had years that I spent here trying to find my place. That really power of storytelling, right? I read your story and I'm like, I know what this guy must have felt at the time. So you're already immediately connected. I spent 20 years in corporate, man. You somehow unlearn to tell stories, right? Because you're sitting in boardrooms and you're talking about P&Ls, budget cuts, and email campaigns and KPIs and those kind of things. You not necessarily talk so much about stories. And so when I left my job, I was also in a bit of like, I was 44, I was in a bit of identity crisis. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do next. You also unlearn a little bit who you are in 20 years in a corporation, right? Then you have to figure out again, who am I? What do I want to do with my life? And that was one of the first headhunters I spoke to, and I was unprepared. I had absolutely no clue what kind of story I want to tell. I had absolutely no clue what benefits I could bring to a future employee. So we were talking to 20 minutes, and thanks God he was not one of the headhunters who would said like, well, yeah, thank you, we're going to put you in our database and I'm going to let you know. He was very honest with me, and he said, mate, you have some work to do, right? Your CV is shit. You really need to craft your story, because your background is awesome, but you need to craft your story. And that's what I spent part of 2020 as well, is really to identify who am I, what do I want to do next, but also what's the story I want to tell to the people, and what's the story that's truly about me. And that took some time to develop and to learn. But then it somehow started to work a little bit.
So one thing I was curious when I heard that, I mean, sure, I get the identity crisis, and I get how it's a big shift from where you were doing to anything else. But you worked in marketing for about 15 years. So was it just that storytelling as such wasn't that big a part of the type of marketing you were involved in? Or was it just that when you became the product, the whole thing just became very confusing?
I mean, of course, I was running the content marketing department for the company for a couple of years. And of course, there was also stories that we told, but they were not about me, right? They were about the candidates in the market, about the change in the HR and recruitment industry. But when you do that, and you're wired to do that for a company or a solution or a product that's not attached to you personally, I mean, pays your bills and your paycheck. But then after 20 years, you sit in front of yourself and says like, who am I, right? Because what's my story? And of course, in my case, and I talked very openly about it to a lot of people. I came together with the crisis I faced last year as a human, as like everyone else with the surroundings you are in, trying to find a job, and you're also in sometimes in an emotional, quite rocky place where you don't really have the strength to be very analytical, where you just try to hang through the day. And But then I think by late summer, early October, when I started to make some changes, obviously I also thought more about, okay, what are really my values as a person, as when I want to do this thing on my own. So what do I want to work on? What people I would like to work with as well, and how do I craft my story around me as a person, because I'm a solopreneur.
You said, when I started to tell stories, I really struggled. I felt I had no talent for it and that my writing sucked. So I began to study writing techniques and how to draft a compelling story. I even tried to copy other people's styles.
Yeah, I
Pathetic,
did.
I know.
I did.
Okay, so what was the breakthrough? Because you seem to have a very simple and direct storytelling style. Was it? Did you read something from someone that the puzzle just fell into place, and all of a sudden you were able to write the way you write? Was it more of a gradual thing? How did you go from being someone who felt that you sucked to someone who clearly feels, I would say, a lot more comfortable with telling stories, because it's almost a daily thing now for you?
Yeah, I did several things. At the beginning, I started really to talk to people who are really doing that well. And I'm like, how do you do that? And as you know, there is a structure behind storytelling, right? There are some techniques that
A few, yes.
a few that can lead you to success. And if you use those kind of framework sets in your stories, it's quite likely that your story is going to be a compelling one. If you connect it with some elements that also work for humans, right? Emotion, personality, experience sharing, this kind of stuff. So I talked to them, and they told me a couple of things. Then I was reading a lot of posts. I was just studying other people and how they posted. And then but what changed things for me is when I started really to write it. And I remember I started to write a couple of articles in December on LinkedIn, quite lengthy ones, as articles, and they got very low engagement. Thanks God, I had a few friends who liked them, so I had at least some likes. And then in January, I tried first to share some other people's stuff that really didn't work, and then I mastered up the courage. I remember the first story I wrote, or the first post I wrote, it was more about myself, was about a time in Australia with my daughter. And that immediately got more engagement than any of other stuff I did before. And then it's a matter of repetition. You know that, right? If you do it every day, it becomes more easy from week to week, and you're finding your style more. And right now, I think I know how to craft a story, how to structure it based on the message I want to send. There are sometimes different structures I use. And but with everything in life, if you do it for a consistent long period of time, you're getting better with it.
I think
Surprisingly.
I think it's very important to clarify that your definition of how long you have practiced it and how long you repeated it for, to most people, I think a lot of people hear that and think, okay, well, this is going to take me a very long time. So if anyone hasn't caught on to that, let me put that into perspective again. As late as this January, you still weren't doing that. You didn't really know what sort of your voice was or how to tell personal stories. And from, let's say, February to now, we're talking about 6 months or a bit under 6 months. You've gone from being someone who felt you absolutely sucked at telling stories
Yeah.
to having gotten a few million views on your content. Didn't you have a post that got to, if
Yeah.
not a million, but hundreds of thousands of
No,
views?
I had, that's a fascinating thing. I mean, that's what I write all the time. It's not about numbers, right? The intent should be a different one, but obviously we are looking at how our numbers are looking like and how far our engagement goes, because that's also a measurement for what we are doing there. So I had in the last 6 months of 2020, I had, I think, 4,000 views in 6 months. And in the first 6 months now, I have 4 million. So, and that didn't start like this, right? I wrote something a few weeks ago about the first 5 months and showed my numbers to give people understanding. That's a progression. But obviously, as you know, when you have one or two posts who are really going a little bit out of norm, I would say that can change everything. So I had one, I think, that changed for me everything 2 weeks ago, who is right now at 1.8 million views and has over 29,000 likes. That doubled my follower base, only that post, from 6,000 to 13,000. So when you look at numbers, you can see the progression. And you're right, it doesn't take you years, right? It can happen in 6 months. I don't say it will happen with everyone, but I'm coming back to the conversation that we have before. It will not happen after 2 weeks. Or after 4. And you also, as you know, and as many know who do that, you also have the problem that when you had those good running posts, that don't believe for a second that from now on it's all like roses, and it's not you don't have to work anymore, right?
You haven't made it.
No. The next,
Oh, 100,000 views in a post. I made it. I'm a superstar now.
I think my next post had like 5,000. I had I think 90 likes, right? And but this is the whole thing. That's the whole, and that's what I also talk to my clients, is I try to prepare them for the emotional part that this whole thing comes with. Because most of them, they are not used to the fact to put their neck out, right? For them, it's really hard to put their face and their name to a post, because they are concerned about judgment, what other people might think of them. They mostly start from a point of view, as I started, that they think no one wants to listen to their stuff, no one is interested. And when you then go through the whole stages over the first couple of months, where you have a good running post, and then you have a couple of weeks when no one looks at your post and you have very few engagements, and you're getting disappointment and frustrated, and that's the time where a lot of people quit. And that's what I talk to a lot of the people I talk to about it, my clients. It's also about this emotional preparedness of what's going to come, and that you also know that's totally normal. That's not related only to you. Everyone who has been on this journey has been through it. That's a totally normal part of it.
Yeah, and I think that is a very important point. And I think handling the emotion of business in general, but social media in particular, is truly a challenge for a lot of people. But I think as a case study of how effective telling personal stories consistently can be, there are not that many people that I know on LinkedIn that are a better case study than you are.
Thank
Because
you.
from essentially nothing on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
6 months later to having millions and millions of views and having built a business. And I'm sure there's plenty of work to be done on the business side,
Yeah.
but
My
but
coach would
but
agree as well.
but the exposure you've gotten and the name you've built for yourself, now is the question of turning those eyeballs into customers. But just the eyeballs alone, for most people, that is far beyond what they have and can dream of at the moment. And it hasn't taken you years to build that audience. It has taken you a few months.
And what's important, what I'm telling everyone I speak to, I'm a normal guy. I mean, I'm not like I'm not a rocket scientist, right? But I have what I have done what I told you. I made a strategy for myself. I knew that I needed to create awareness for a couple of months for myself and for the business, that people know that I'm around. And that was my main goal. I mean, I knew the first 3 months I wouldn't convert it into a lot of business. I mean, lucky enough, I did a little bit, but I prepared myself for a couple of months, purely focused on building awareness to come to a point where people know that I'm in the market and that I'm around, and then to have time to convert some of the stuff into business. And I was the same like Manny at the beginning in January when I talked to some people about it who are really well on that as well, and they told me what their journey was and how fast it can be. Then at some breaking point, I told them like, that's BS. I don't believe you at all. You're making this up.
Yes.
But I made the same experience, and I know two other people who made the same experience right now. But they have done what I think what you and I have talked about. They did it very deliberately, and most importantly, they showed up every day.
Right. And on that note, I'm going to start wrapping this up because unfortunately our our little technical issues in the beginning have cost us a few of the minutes that I had. I'm not going to give the opportunity. I'm not going to get the opportunity to talk to you if you're a Hamburg football fan as well, because if you were, I'm actually wearing a Grêmio shirt by accident, who was a team that beat Hamburg in the Champions League.
You're going to start this. You're going to end this whole thing as you started it.
Exactly.
Right?
It's a story thing. I'm going to wrap it at the beginning.
By just throwing me in the misery of German football at them.
Well, I think it's safe to say that most German football is not misery.
No,
So.
well, it's just at the moment. I'm going to watch rugby this evening. That's going to be different.
Right. So if anyone wants to connect with you, LinkedIn is the most obvious place. And if they want to check out your website, is human-marketing.org.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Michael, it's been a pleasure.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you. That was fun. Sorry for the technical issues at the beginning.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourselves. And until next time.